Oh hey, I know that guy. That's the dude.
This is quite the fog.
It is.
Are we even making progress? We could just be
No, you're
going in
not.
circles.
You're not
Good
making
point.
progress at all.
If only someone could fly above and scout the way.
Yo,
As though
you
I
guys
could see
see
anything through
anything?
this
No, you
muck.
don't.
Honestly, do you ever think before
Nah,
you
he
speak?
doesn't.
Getting lost is the least of our worries.
Yeah.
Something attacked
Gotta stay
us.
vigilant.
We wouldn't see it coming.
It would be awful.
We must be prepared for even the most unusual. Whoa.
Oh hey, there's a guy right there. This freaking game, man. Oh my god. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is an interesting game, to say the least. I spent the past few days catching up on it after being busy for the holidays, and I've gotta say, Age of Calamity was an incredibly enjoyable experience that also left me confused. The story of the game was supposed to act as a sort of prequel to 2017's Breath of the Wild, which takes place 100 years after this game, and in Breath of the Wild, we managed to get glimpses of what happened 100 years ago and how the Calamity transpired, but this was supposed to defog the mirror, if you will, and provide a far more in-depth look at what happened. And the game did accomplish this, to its credit. However, the way that the game accomplished it left me rather dumbfounded, if I'm being completely honest. And this isn't a bad thing in the slightest either. I genuinely loved all of my time spent playing it, but it was just so out of left field that I still don't know what to think. But before diving into spoiler territory with the story and all that, I suppose I should just talk about the game itself first. This video is going to act as a sort of review / general thoughts on the game and my overall experience with it. So, with that being said, let's get started. The first thing I want to touch on is just how much this feels like a natural extension of Breath of the Wild itself. The dedication to the source material and keeping the integrity of the original intact is incredibly impressive. From the music to the models and environments and even the menus, it looks and feels exactly like Breath of the Wild. If you had shown footage of this game to me before it was announced and told me it was some sort of DLC or mod for the original, I would have believed you completely, and I think that's something to be commended. I'm aware that the Zelda team worked far more closely with Koei Tecmo on this game than they did on the original Hyrule Warriors, and it shows. Now let's talk about the gameplay itself. The only experience I have with the Dynasty Warriors franchise is through both the Hyrule Warriors games, so my opinions will be from that perspective rather than from a seasoned Dynasty Warriors player. With that being said, the core gameplay loop of Age of Calamity was incredibly satisfying, even for Hyrule Warriors standards. You have your typical mission structure that follows the story of the game and has a variety of standard objectives within. For example, capturing outposts, eliminating high-value targets, defending points of interest, and escorting VIPs. There's also a very large amount of challenge scenarios and side quests that unlock as you progress through the campaign and strengthen your characters. Now, these on their own aren't very interesting, I'll be honest, but the way that they work together creates a pretty straightforward yet rewarding progression system. If you want to bum rush the story all the way to the end, you can, there's nothing stopping you from doing that, and that's mostly what I did as well. However, if you choose to do that, you will have to play far more strategically in the later portions of the campaign because you're missing key upgrades or enhancements for your characters that mitigate the difficulty spikes. I blasted through the majority of the chapters early on pretty easily, but eventually hit a point where I actually failed the mission multiple times and had to completely rethink my strategy and play very conservatively. That mission took roughly like 35 to 45 minutes to complete. Now, I can hear you asking, Maestro, what's the combat like? Well, my dear viewer, let me enlighten you. The combat in Age of Calamity is pretty straightforward on the surface. Every character has a light attack and a heavy attack that can combo together, a special attack that charges over time, and a unique ability that's tied to the right trigger. Every character also has access to the Sheikah Slate and its 4 runes: Stasis, Cryonis, Magnesis, and Remote Bombs. These runes are incredibly powerful and change the way you take on encounters. Additionally, you can also use the Fire, Ice, and Lightning Rods, which are incredibly useful for stunning and weakening enemies. As for the actual one-on-one engagement, it feels like Breath of the Wild, but with combos, if I'm being honest. You can block, parry, dodge, and even flurry rush if you dodge at the last second. Flurry rushing is incredibly powerful because it's one of the many ways you can attack what's called an enemy's weak point gauge. The weak point gauge is a meter that you can steadily drain from an enemy over the course of combat. These only appear on bosses and mini-bosses, and when this meter hits 0, you can perform an incredibly flashy and powerful attack called a weak point smash that will drain large portions of health or, in some cases, even kill your target. Enemies also have several very strong attacks that can only be countered by either dodging it completely or using the appropriate Sheikah rune to stop them in their tracks. This creates an interesting dynamic where you have to choose when and when not to use your Sheikah Slate. All of the runes are on a cooldown after you use them, so if you need to use Stasis on a Guardian and don't have access to it, you might be in for a world of pain. Just like I was. Right here. And here. And here. But the combat in a Warriors game would be nothing without its roster of characters. There are a total of 18 of them in Age of Calamity, including staples such as Link, Impa, Zelda, and the 4 champions. Each of these characters also has a plethora of side quests and challenges that can unlock new combos or enhance them with other upgrades, such as more health or special attack meters. The challenges themselves are short combat encounters with specific objectives that you need to complete within the time limit. These missions can also reward special items that you can use to complete the side quests in the game. The side quests themselves are a glorified resource dump, which I honestly loved, like, a lot. A lot of times in games, I'm not really a fan of side quests unless they either 1, have an interesting story, or 2, are either short enough or have a substantial enough of a reward to justify the work. Otherwise, they just kind of feel like an incredibly boring waste of time. Age of Calamity solves this problem by providing you with spoils from completing story missions and challenges, and then letting you turn them all in from the map. Additionally, these quests can also unlock you special services, such as merchants, a blacksmith, the dye shop, and even a training ground that lets you level up characters with rubies. However, you can only level them up to the same level as your highest character. This is an incredible way of leveling up characters that you haven't used without having to just grind the same missions over and over again. This can also be seen as a way to keep the difficulty fair and engaging, because as long as you have the rupees, every character should be available for you to use. The last thing I want to touch on in terms of gameplay is the different difficulty options available to you. There are 4 levels to choose from: easy, normal, hard, and very hard. I did my initial playthrough on normal and felt that the difficulty was pretty balanced throughout my whole run. The end got pretty challenging, as I mentioned earlier, but I feel that was of my own design rather than the game randomly curving upwards. I believe you can also change the difficulty at any point if you feel that what you chose isn't right for you. This also makes grinding challenges for money or resources incredibly easy if you want to take that route. Just slap it on easy and you're good to go. Now, there are 2 things remaining that I want to discuss: the music and the story. Let's start with the music. In the original Breath of the Wild, the OST took a rather minimalistic approach which did an absolutely wonderful job of setting the tone of the entire game, and I adored it. It had an incredibly profound and artistic vibe to it that I've never seen before. However, there was a part of me that sometimes missed the more traditional style of Zelda music, which usually had a lot more going on. Age of Calamity's soundtrack solves any qualms I originally had, and I love it to death. It still contains that minimalistic approach in a lot of tracks, such as the title theme or A Quiet Moment, but there's also a lot of songs that are a lot more busy and intense. There's this perfect balance between the minimalist, whimsical, and menacing tracks that make it a joy to listen to. Hell, you've been listening to it this whole time, and I have a good feeling that you loved it. And now we come to the story. I have a couple of conflicted feelings on this, but overall I really enjoyed it, so let's talk about it. Oh yeah, this is also your spoiler warning. I won't be spoiling every detail, but I will be spoiling some major plot points, so be warned. Our quest initially follows a mysterious guardian named Terraco. This little guy is from a timeline where Calamity Ganon succeeded, and he has time traveled in an effort to warn Zelda and the others about these events and prevent them. I didn't really think anything of this at first and just continued playing, but as time went on, I realized something. We weren't playing the prequel to Breath of the Wild like we were led to believe. We were playing the prequel to another story. Eventually, in Age of Calamity, you will reach a point where Calamity Ganon has awakened. Everything up until now seems to line up with Breath of the Wild exactly. The Guardians have been taken over by Ganon, the Divine Beasts are no longer under Hyrule's control, with their pilots trapped inside, and all hope seems lost. But Terraco is somehow able to use his powers to transport the champion's descendants, Sidon, Teba, Riju, and Yunobo, across timelines and prevent them from dying in this one. This leads to a whole separate arc of a centralized war effort from all of Hyrule against the Calamity. Even the Yiga clan revolts and joins Hyrule's forces. I honestly love this. I love the idea of everyone in Hyrule, friend or foe, coming together to fight a single looming threat that could kill them all. My main problem stems from how this makes me feel about Breath of the Wild's story, because it almost makes me feel like what we did in Breath of the Wild was irrelevant. Or at the very least, we still don't know what exactly went down in the timeline where the champions failed, and that's where I'm torn. I loved everything about this game's story. I loved the character development and the interactions. I loved the amount of cutscenes and work that went into them. I loved the story beats. I loved seeing how Princess Zelda struggled with her own duties and her relationship with her father. I'm just lost when it comes to what's next. Which timeline will the sequel to Breath of the Wild follow? Is what we did in the original relevant, or is Age of Calamity just a fun little side thing that they wanted to explore while still keeping the story canon? Will the champion's descendants remember any of this in the sequel? These are just a couple of the questions on my mind. I really enjoyed the game and can highly recommend it for anyone interested. The curveball of a story that was shown is hardly a negative, but it was something I really wanted to mention and the most profound feeling I had when I finished the game. Despite any of this, you can feel the love that was poured into this game, and I'd say it's definitely worth your time.